What's your I met a celebrity, but didn't let on that I knew who they were story? I helped Steven Spielberg move his daughter's bags into her college dorm. I was working a shift helping first years move in, and I see a guy in a hat and sunglasses who is unmistakably Spielberg. I strike up a conversation, ask if he needs help with the bags, etc. First names only, we are from CA. My wife, Kate, and I sent all our kids to East Coast schools though. Stuff like that. Later, when his daughter opened the door for the first time, he whipped out a camcorder and, wearing the biggest dad grin, recorded the whole thing before turning the camera on my friend and me to ask us about the city. So, I have a supporting, the luggage, speaking role in a limited release, home movie, film shot by Steven Spielberg. My mom is a big sports fan. One time she was shopping at, and saw a really large, fit looking man who she didn't immediately recognize but seemed familiar. She thought it must have been a professional football player or something, so she went up to the only other person in the shop, who was this smaller weird looking guy, and asked him if he knew who the athletic looking man was. The short guy looked at my mom and said, "That's my bodyguard, I'm Elton John." I had the fortune of being on the same plane as Stanley. We were being shuttled to another part of the airport. I whispered to what I assumed to be his bodyguard that I didn't want to lead others on who he was, so please just let him know that I appreciate his work. He nodded, then whispered into Stanley's ear. He then smiled and put his head down in acknowledgement. Rest in peace, big guy. You were a big part of my childhood. I was 10 years old in 2002 when my mom took me to the Bronx Zoo for the first time. It was a rainy day, so we practically had the whole place to ourselves except for 3 British kids running around, chaperoned by a woman. My mom quickly befriended the woman, while I made like a kid, and joined the horde, looking at spiders and scorpions, and sharing in the awe and excitement of the animals. After about an hour, when we said our goodbyes, my mother told me that the kid, Daniel, who I had been hanging out with, had played Harry Potter in the movie that came out last year. I had thought he looked familiar. I used to be a server at a Mexican restaurant right outside LA in the late 90s. One day Leonardo DiCaprio came in with who I assume was his mom to have lunch. This would have been post-Titanic, so really at the peak of his breakthrough mega celeb status. He was wearing a bowl cap, sunglasses and unshaven, but I recognized him anyway. I didn't let anyone know, and I wrote something like, "Your movies are awesome. I hope you liked our food," on his receipt when I dropped it off at the table. After he left, I swung by and picked up his payment, and he had left me a note back that said, "Thank you so much for not blowing my cover," with a $100 tip. Shit was awesome. I was only like 19. I went and got some PlayStation games with it after my shift ended. This happened yesterday. My wife took my son to the zoo, and he wanted to read every little plaque in the reptile area. My wife was distracted for a moment, so he asked the nearest stranger to read the plaque for him. My wife turned around to see Scarlett Johansson happily reading the info to him. I worked at a movie theater in Albuquerque at the time they were filming the first Avengers film. Captain America was about to come out. I remember because we had a huge standee of him in the lobby. I was reading in the box office when 3 people came up. Guy asked for 3 tickets to Bridesmaids. It was dark out, and he had a green baseball cap and sunglasses. He paid with a credit card. Christopher Evans. I stared at the card after I swiped it, handed it back. "I need you to sign the receipt." He did, and then he walked in. I almost literally ran into Shaq at a small restaurant in LA. He was standing in the doorway. You know how some people are so tall you don't see them? So I'm exiting the doorway and say, "Excuse me man," and he stepped aside so I could leave. He is one large human being. In the mid-90s I was a cab driver. Our service was like a cross between a limo and a taxi, and we serviced some fancy resorts. As I dropped off my passenger at a resort, another guy asks if I'm a taxi, and I say yes, so he tells his friend their cab is here. His friend got in the car and said this ain't no cab, smells too good to be a cab in that unmistakable Chris Rock voice. He and his friend just bullshitted with each other for the 15-minute drive to a local nightclub. There was a white kid trying to talk to a yellow cab driver ahead of us in the parking lot, and Chris Rock started imitating the kid. Like, I need a ride. Yeah, I'm drunk, but I need a ride. And I was trying really hard not to laugh out loud. He wasn't nearly as famous yet at the time, but I had seen his stand-up routines on Comedy Central and knew exactly who he was, but didn't go fanboy on him. 10/10ths would drive Chris Rock again. My dad met Robin Williams in an elevator. He got in, and they rode a few floors in silence. They stopped on a floor and bunch of fans ran in and started getting pics with Robin. My dad said he was gracious and took pics with everyone. The doors closed and they rode a few more floors, and my dad turned and said, "Does that ever get old?" And Robin smiled and said, "Nope, never." Then my dad got off on his floor and they nodded to one another, and my dad went on with his day. Used to work at a posh hotel, and we had wedding there all the time. I was pretty young at the time, say 15. David Tennant was at one wedding, Doctor fucking Who, and I was pouring him coffee. At first I was sat there thinking, is he/isn't he? So I was playing it cool. I went back to the kitchen to top up more coffee in my coffee jug, and the staff were talking about it too before deciding it actually was David Tennant. Spent the rest of the night playing it cool, because I was in that whatever stage of teenage life. Inside I was freaking out. I was at IKEA in Vancouver and noticed this lady in a low-hanging hat had dropped something. I helped her pick it up and noticed it was ceramic lacquer. Didn't let on that I knew who she was because I couldn't think of anything to say. Robin Williams used to walk around my lone childhood country town near SF. I saw him once, after hearing many rumors about his sightings, not entirely unlike Bigfoot or Nessie sightings. My brain didn't fully comprehend what it was seeing, but I could tell he was trying his very best to remain incognito and not draw any unwanted attention. We locked eyes. He smiled, I smiled and nodded back, and we both went our separate ways. Met Elon Musk in a Tesla store in LA. Really wanted to meet him, but didn't want to be that guy. Decided I had a plan, so walked up to him and said, "Excuse me, do you work here?" He replied, "I mean, yeah, kind of." I say, "What can you tell me about the entertainment console of the Model S?" He says, "Let me see if I can find someone to help you." To which I say, "Now I'm just fucking with you." He laughed and shook my hand and walked off. Worked at a hotel and Russell Crowe came in the lobby. He went to the house phones and called front desk, where I was working. I could see him pretty easily. I answered the phone and he asked to be connected to a room, so I put him through. This wasn't long after he threw a phone at a hotel clerk, so I didn't want to take a chance at pissing him off. Couple of years ago I was playing blackjack at a relatively low stakes table, maybe $10 minimum. I was chatting up a lady in her 30s next to me, just chatting, nothing more. Her husband was sitting next to her. He was a frumpy guy in his 60s. After about 30 minutes he took off and left the table. I was still chatting up the lady, and she told me that other guy was her husband. I asked why they were in town, and she said for work. She mentioned that her husband was the drummer for Aerosmith, Joey Kramer, playing at the same casino the next night. I stupidly asked how, when he started playing with them. Her reply, "Since the beginning." Samuel L. Jackson was on my flight. I was second to last to board the flight, and there was all this commotion with the flight attendants and gate crew. Once I approached the door of the plane I realized they were all looking at Samuel L. Jackson. He was standing by the cockpit making himself available to passengers/fans. I played it cool. Didn't say a word. Turns out, I'm shy around celebrities. I'm just glad I didn't make a snakes on the plane joke. Michelle Pfeiffer used to come into the hockey rink I played at in NorCal. Her son played, and so did David. She'd sit up in the club/restaurant watching practice or games and no one ever treated her like she was mega famous. We mostly just left her alone. BTW, she's even more beautiful in person. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a like. Come back tomorrow for more videos. Subscribe to become cheese.